Hello YouTube, welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy and this is Scruffy Tales. And yes indeed, Ukraine gains ground on the Russians, pushing the Russians back, and close to the action we can find the 21st Mechanized, also known as the Swedish Brigade. So, despite Russian advantage, Ukraine is still able to slowly but surely push Russia back east of the town of Terny, located in the box on the map. Here we can find several Ukrainian units, including the 21st Mechanized, that relies on the Swedish Strv122 main battle tank and the SRF-90 40 infantry fighting vehicle, perhaps better known as the CV90. And nearby we have the 45th Artillery Brigade that operate the devastating Archer self-propelled howitzers. And what's interesting is that we're going to be taking a look at this section of the front line outside of Terny, because as you can see, this is the deep state map, and it lists that the Russians are in control basically of these two fields, indicating that there's a lot of fighting going on in this valley here. But if you take a look at Russian sources, pro-Russian sources, they list such as Syriac Maps and others reporting on the war in Ukraine, they have Russia situated along the edge of this valley and all the way over here, and then down here this way, leaving this in the gray zone, meaning Ukraine has advanced into this area, pushed Russia back away from this valley, and even pushed them away from this windbreak and this windbreak. And this is no small thing. It's roughly 1 kilometer across here as well as down here. So according to Russian sources, Ukraine has well and truly pushed Russia back away from this valley all the way back here to the far end of these two large fields. And this is very interesting because if we zoom out here, we have Terny, Yampolivka, and the Russians have, for a couple of months now, been pushing their way westward towards these two villages, pushing into these valleys in order to reach the villages themselves so they can secure the bridges. But of late, in the last couple of weeks, something has been going on here that we don't see anywhere else along the front line. Ukraine is pushing back. We saw Ukraine coming in this way, securing territory up here. If they're still there, a bit unclear, but if they have access to this part of the battlefield, they have the high ground and can fire into the valley, effectively denying the Russians any chance of maneuvering this way to support their frontline troops in the woods here. We have also seen Russian positions been forced back up here on the ridgeline, indicating that Ukraine has pushed up on the ridge, up on the hill, and forced the Russians back to the valleys. The Russians can no longer operate out here along the main road and in this windbreak. And then we saw Ukraine make a big push here a week ago or so, and they liberated all of this territory, this important windbreak, and effectively pushed Russia away from this valley, denying the Russians any chance of pushing into the valley to reach Yampolivka. And now, looking at Russian sources, the Russians have been pushed back yet again away from this valley all the way across the fields to this valley, right? So Ukraine, they made a push here, then they make a big push here, and now they have made another push into this valley, forcing the Russians back. And I think it's safe to say that this valley here is now in Ukrainian control, since if the Russians are over here, their only hope of fighting in this valley is by going through these windbreaks and maybe YOLO it across the fields here. But if their only chance of reaching the valley here is through this and this windbreak, I'm pretty certain that this valley is indeed in Ukrainian hands at the moment. And if we take a look at the ISW map, here we have the valleys in question. Here, this is where the pro-Russians are saying that the Russians are situated. You can see ISW still has the Russians in control of the fields. But I mean, this is wide open farmland. It's not unreasonable to imagine that the Russians aren't running around out on the open fields here, and that they are indeed situated back in cover along the windbreaks and in the valleys. So, according to the Russians, Ukraine has pushed in this way into this area here, or at least forced the Russian away from the fields. So these two valleys, as you can see, are leading down to Yampolivka. Here we have Yampolivka, here's the river, and here are the valleys. So Ukraine began with securing this valley, pushing the Russians away from the top here, from the mouth of the valley, securing it. The Russians are now unable to push in, and then they have done the same with this valley as well. So they have now secured Yampolivka. The Russians can, at the moment at least, not threaten Yampolivka. And the Ukrainians are in complete control of these two very crucial valleys, and they have now pushed up on the high ground and are engaging the Russians up on the high ground here, away from the valleys. So, yeah, we've seen the Ukraine. Here you can see where the Ukrainians allegedly have pushed in, and as you can see, they have the high ground on this valley, able to fire into the valley from this overwatch position. And then they made a push here. The ISW map seems to indicate that Russia is still in control of this windbreak, but all the other maps show that this windbreak is in Ukrainian control. And then, of course, we saw Ukraine push up this way to secure this valley, and now, like we've said, they pushed up this way and secured the entirety of this valley. So they have secured these two valleys now. They have a foothold on the high ground, fighting in the fields against the Russians. So what will Ukraine do now? Well, since they pushed up this way and then pushed up this way, I'm thinking we may see in the next couple of weeks an attempt to push up this way, or potentially even this way. So Ukraine will try and liberate one of these, secure one more valley, either this one or this one, because they seem to be on a roll here. They have momentum, they are taking the fight to the Russians, and they are able to push up through the valleys and secure the high ground. And I think we will see them try again in one of these two valleys here. And if things progress as we've seen so far, I'm thinking Ukraine stands a good chance of succeeding in, well, either one of these two valleys now. They are in control of these two valleys. I'm thinking they will try and repeat these successes and push the Russians away from Terny and push them eastward away from these valley systems. So just to take a quick look at the bird's eye view again, these are the two valleys that we know that they have secured, and they pushed up on the high ground and taken the fight to the Russians. And I think it's reasonable to assume that Ukraine will try something similar here or here, right? In order to secure Terny, they are on a roll. The Russians are on the back foot. Ukraine is pushing Russia further east, and the Russians are having trouble, maybe because of the Kharkiv front, that the Russians in this area are having trouble with resources and supplies and what have you. And the Ukrainians are currently capitalizing on it. And like I said, in this area is where we have the 21st Mechanized, and they are operating CV90s and Strv122s. And nearby we have the 45th Artillery Brigade that have the Archers. There was a video not that long ago where we had the 45th Artillery Brigade apparently targeting Russians outside of Chasiv Yar, and they say that those hits were done with Archers. So maybe there are no Archers up here anymore. Maybe they are down by Chasiv Yar, who knows? But safe to say is that we have CV90s and Strv122s in this area where Ukraine is currently pushing Russia back, and they are winning decisive victories, important victories in securing the valleys. And here we have an Strv122 opening fire, bringing wrath onto the Russians across a field. And I believe this is the first video or image, photograph, whatever, of a Swedish Strv122 engaging in combat. I don't think we've seen any videos of that before, or footage even. They've been moving around in propaganda movies and stuff like that, or films or video snippets. But this is the first case where we have an Strv122 firing with intent to kill Russians. So despite everything going on with Russia opening up a new front in the north at Kharkiv, and potentially are about to storm in towards Sumy as well, and attacking Chasiv Yar and pushing in through Ocheretine and what have you, despite everything going on, Ukraine is actually able to push back. And at Terny, they are gaining ground, securing vital valleys, and pushing up onto the high ground where they are now taking the fight to the Russians. And more than likely, we have Swedish vehicles in the thick of it, CV90s, Strv122s, helping out in providing important victories to Ukraine. And that's going to have to be it. I hope you found it at least somewhat interesting, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, gå på marsch, Ukraine, give them hell.